Hello, this is Babson Nexus, and I'm watching something on ESPN2. While this doesn't sound too impressive on its own, how I'm going about doing it really is. Let's rewind a little bit so you can see why. Here I am in Feral HTPC, a Windows app for accessing channels DVR made by user community member Bobby Vaughn. There are official apps for Android and Apple devices, as well as a web interface, but I wanted to use this one so I could more easily demonstrate a few things without changing displays. It'll all become clear in a bit. Now, one of the benefits of Channels DVR is that we can combine linear sources from just about anywhere into the interface, and they are all treated exactly the same. That means whether a station comes from over the air via an antenna, a streaming fast supplier like Pluto, a cable/satellite/MVPD OTT provider, i.e. YouTube TV, with a way to capture it, or a webcast. Channels DVR allows you to watch each of them live or recorded for later. As a matter of fact, you can time shift and place shift with ease. Frankly, among all the options for managing audio-visual media out there, I find that Channels DVR is the best choice because it plain works. No fuss, no muss. To be fair, there are other programs and solutions you can use that have these features, or at least ones like them. But during this video, I'm only going to be discussing Channels DVR. And up front, this is not sponsored, reviewed, or approved in any way by Channels DVR or its parent company FancyBits. I'm a paying customer and have the same access to the owners and developers as anyone else does. Just know that anything I say related to Channels DVR can be applied elsewhere if that is your desire. Further, if you're looking for general information on Channels DVR, how-to instructions, or anything like that, please consult their own website, YouTube page, and community message board. You can probably find me there too. That all said, what has been especially nice that really sets Channels DVR apart is its built-in functionality to use your cable/satellite/MVPD OTT login to get to stations from your preferred paid service, ones like ESPN2. This is possible because the stations are streaming over the web in a process known as TV Everywhere, or TVE. Channels DVR seamlessly logs into their websites, starts a stream, and redirects it into its own interface. That is what you saw me do earlier with FS1. From a user perspective, you don't even know it's happening. It just plays or records when you want it to. Unfortunately, over the past few years, some companies have either been removing the means to do this by taking down their pages, or, more often, attaching digital rights management, aka DRM. For the purposes of this explainer, DRM is a protocol that limits how digital content can be distributed by putting in place certain roadblocks that make the current methods of capturing streams not viable. While they generally claim DRM is an anti-piracy function, many people, myself included, find it to be emphatically anti-consumer, designed to limit choice and flexibility, all while pushing people inside their walled gardens. Business and political opinions aside, people like me and many others in the Channels DVR user community are pushing solutions to circumvent these limitations so we can get our paid-for content how, where, and when we want it. You know, the thing that end users actually care about. So, how do we go about capturing something without violating terms of service or laws? no matter how dubious we may find both of those? Well, one option is a method called Chrome Capture, where we can literally grab what is happening inside a Chrome tab and turn it into a live stream. And the tool to do this is PrismCast by HJD. Here, you can see me launching FX, a Disney-owned property. All Disney streams are DRM protected, but in order to be able to watch them, every major web browser has DRM decryption built in. What you are seeing PrismCast do is open a Chrome tab, launch the ABC webpage, confirm the login, go to the specific stream, start it, make it full screen, and then commence capturing and transmitting what is in that tab. This is technically no different than sharing a program on your screen using something like Zoom or OBS, just with a lot more pizzazz. Let's look at another example. Like Disney, the Versant properties are also DRM protected. However, in this case, my cable provider Cox allows me to watch certain stations inside their interface. Thus, much the same, when I go to watch or record sci-fi, PrismCast can access that interface instead of using the USA Network webpage. In the end, it's up to me as a user to decide which I think is the best source to take. Despite its clear ease of setup and use, PrismCast does have some trade-offs that must be considered. Not the least of which is that it's extremely resource intensive and can be a bit intrusive on your desktop, as you've seen. There are ways around this, of course, including offloading to another device. However, if you're going to start using external machines, there's a different approach we could take. Let's return to where this all began with ESPN2. This time, let's watch everything as it progresses. When I launch ESPN2 as if it is any other station, I start receiving a live feed through a tool called ADBTuner by TurtleTank. What you are seeing is the capture of an Android TV streaming dongle in real time. In my case, it's a TiVo Stream 4K+, but it could be anything like a Chromecast with Google TV, ONN, Fire TV, or plenty of other options. No matter the device, a set of instructions are sent that tell it which app to launch, how long to wait for it to load, and then what button presses to make. In the ESPN app, that means pressing down until it reaches the bottom, then going right to get to the correct station, and finally making selections until it gets to play the live content. Yes, it can take up to a minute or so, but in the end, I have the real station at a high quality playing or recording in my regular channels DVR interface without really any overhead to consider on my main driver. But you might be wondering if you're limited to Android TV devices, and the answer is absolutely not. This time, I'm going to launch VH1, a Paramount Skydance property. At the time of this recording, there is no functional Android TV app for VH1, but there is one for Roku. Due to this, I'm able to use Roku Bridge, which was also created by Bobby Vaughn. Just as with ADBTuner, key presses are sent in a human-like manner in order to get to and play the content. To be clear, we want to act like a human because these apps are not designed to handle rapid, near-instant presses that you could do with a pure software solution. During testing, I found many of these apps would actually crash if you tried to do too much, too quickly. As such, although it may take a hot minute to get to the content, being conservative with our wait times allows these apps to load and process without concern. So, how do we make the magic happen? It begins here with a HDMI encoder. What these guys do is pretty much act like a television does in accepting inputs from their HDMI ports. The only difference is that instead of translating that input onto a screen, They transmit the audio and video locally over the network as a stream that can be received by other devices. As you can see here, I have plugged in the aforementioned circa 2020 TiVo Stream 4K Plus with a USB storage extender to fit all my apps, and a circa 2018 Roku Streaming Stick Plus. Not very high-end stuff, but they do what I need them to. You'll notice that the Roku is connected through a HDMI to USB converter. That is because the HDMI encoder I chose only has one HDMI port, but allows more through its USB ports. And this is where we need to talk about costs. One of the core benefits of PrismCast is that it's basically free, because it doesn't require any new hardware. You can run it on an existing PC, Mac, a Linux machine, or a Docker setup. If you want to do HDMI capture, then you're going to have to outlay some serious cash. The encoders alone start at around US $100 and get up to around $1,000, depending on how many HDMI ports and the level of processing power you want. This is really a measure of how many programs you plan to watch or record at once. In my case, I went with the LinkPi ENC1 V3, which has one HDMI port and the ability to expand through a couple of USB ports. You may want more or less, but no matter what, for each port you're going to need an individual dongle. As such, if you have the potential need to watch and/or record 8 shows at once, that is how many HDMI or equivalent ports you are going to need, plus a streaming stick for each of them. Those can range in price from US $20 to $150, plus perhaps storage expansion depending on how many apps you need, and/or HDMI to USB converters. And then, if you have this much hardware running, you might want to look into a rack and some cooling options. The good news is that you don't have to put everything into place at once. Both ADBTuner and Roku Bridge allow you to add more tuners over time, whether those tuners come from new physical devices or not. The only thing is that they aren't compatible with each other. In other words, if all your tuners on ADBTuner are taken up, and you try to start another station that it would require, it cannot switch over to Roku Bridge, and vice versa. Another tool is going to be necessary for that, but that's for another day. Instead, just realize it's better to go down one path or the other, either Android or Roku, and build out from there. Obviously, I have both, but that's a decision I made for myself around my specific needs and technical curiosity. For your situation, you could just start with the basic encoder containing a single HDMI port attached to one streaming dongle and see how it goes. If you find you need more, you can stack them in and slowly build up as time and finances allow. One of the things I mentioned is that you might need additional storage depending upon the number of apps you'll want. If you have something like YouTube TV or DirecTV, you might only need that app because both ADBTuner and Roku Bridge have the ability to use a method called deep linking. What this means is that if there is a website that brings you to that station content, then you can use that same link and send it to the streaming dongle. It, in turn, will launch the app and use the link to go to that location, resulting in a relatively quick ability to play something. However, that is not my situation. My cable provider, Cox, does not have an Android TV or Roku app, so I'm forced to use native apps from networks like NBC Comcast, Versant, CBS Paramount Skydance, Fox, PBS, ESPN, NFL, Discovery Networks, Time Warner Turner, A&E Global Media, AMC Global Media, and more. Further, even among those apps, most either don't accept deep linking, or it's so unreliable that it's effectively useless. That is why you saw before with ESPN2 and VH1 the mimicking of human movement in selection inside their respective apps. We are calling this the HDMI Encoder Native Apps method. With the help of ADBTuner's Turtle Tank, Roku Bridge's Bobby Vaughn, and others, I have developed and documented all the necessary components you will need to get every available station within these apps with very easy plug-and-play deployment methods. Using this solution, you too can get more than 100 stations spread across a plethora of providers and apps. Of course, you may not want all of them, so you are always free to remove or ignore those without any consequences. Also, many stations do currently work with TVE. Therefore, this solution is not needed right now for those. Nevertheless, every day there is the potential that these networks will pull the plug and either implement DRM or shut down their TVE websites. In order to be prepared, it's worthwhile to have backups that can easily slide into place without you having to manage them. For that, you can use Playlist Manager, a streaming library manager extension by me, Babs and Nexus. What we can do in Playlist Manager, or PLM, is set your sources in a priority, and that is used to determine which individual one we'll try first. As an example, here's my local NBC station. Now, I get it over the air, but I also keep another copy for TVE in case there is some type of area issue going on. The TVE version used to be available directly through Channels DVR's built-in capabilities, but then Comcast implemented DRM. So now, I have my default with ADBTuner, and then backups with Roku Bridge and PrismCast. This is also true of something like HGTV, where I do currently have a TVE option, but who knows how long that will last, especially if Skydance, which already implemented DRM for CBS and Viacom-owned stations, completes its, at the time of this recording, in-progress purchase of Warner Bros. Discovery. Okay, you say, you sold me on the benefits of HDMI Encoder Native Apps. How do I go about getting it? Well, to answer that question, you first need to complete some prerequisites. We already talked about the physical hardware you'll need, but there is some software to consider. First and foremost, you'll want to install Docker Desktop on a host machine. If you're not familiar with Docker, or even if you are and find the whole concept rather daunting, I want to assure you that it's not as bad as you think it is. At the end of the day, it's only another program like any other that installs just as simply. Docker then becomes the engine for operating what we really need, ADBTuner and/or Roku Bridge. These run inside what Docker calls a container, but that's not important. What is that there are multiple ways to load them up, from command lines to Portainer to even Olive Tin for Channels by BNHF. Once you get Olive Tin set up, getting ADBTuner or Roku Bridge, and even the components of HDMI Encoder Native Apps fully deployed is as basic as filling in a couple of fields and clicking a button. The bottom line is that we have all worked exceptionally hard to make things as painless and straightforward as possible, with as little technical knowledge required as can be expected. Even if you don't go down the Olive Tin path, you can still get the HDMI Encoder Native Apps material by importing them into ADBTuner and/or Roku Bridge directly. There are two components to consider: the directions and the stations assigned to those directions. In ADBTuner, the directions are called configurations, and you can get everything you need by putting a link to the HDMI Encoder Native Apps repository and creating a syncing relationship so that every change is automatically reflected. Similarly, in Roku Bridge, directions are called plugins, and you can just click Sync Plugins from Repo to get everything you need. Then, it's a matter of which stations you want. The complete list is available on the HDMI Encoder Native Apps Wiki, but basically, each app has certain channels associated with it. So it is a matter of which apps you want to get all the possible stations. Also, some are only available or unnecessary on Roku or Android, so watch out for that if you're looking for something in particular. Anyway, sticking with Roku Bridge, you can select Browse External Stations and select the groupings you want. Back in ADBTuner, you need to download the corresponding file from the HDMI Encoder Native Apps repository first, and then you can load it through the Import-Export menu for channels. To be clear, it's recommended to just take the All option and ignore or delete the stations you don't need after the fact, but that is up to you and how you want to approach it. Yet even before doing this, the other core prerequisites related to software are around the HDMI encoder and the streaming sticks themselves. From the encoder's perspective, you'll want to set options like the quality of the stream and the level of the volume. I recommend sticking with 1080p at 60 FPS using a H.264 codec, as well as increasing the volume gain by 12 decibels. If what I said was complete gibberish to you, just do what you see on the screen right now. Basically, we're trying to create a high quality stream with good visual and audio components without being overwhelming on the receiving side, and realizing the limitations of the streaming sticks we're dealing with. Of course, you're free to experiment with these settings and see how things go, as your situation experience may be entirely different. What is always going to be the same is the need to install all the apps that you intend to use. Not only that, but once the apps are installed, you'll need to launch them, log in with your TVE provider credentials, and confirm the stations are working. Some of these apps will show you stations whether you have access to them or not, so you'll want to test all of those. You might also need to set other options, such as turning on closed captioning or disabling ad tracking. The good news is that if you are using a HDMI encoder like a LinkPi, you'll have the push area to see the stream in action and can do all your activities there. This means that you don't have to hook the encoder up to a TV or monitor to find out what is happening on these streaming sticks. This will be important too, because you do have to make some changes to them. For the Android TV ones, you need to turn on developer mode and make sure USB debugging is made available. Similarly, for the Roku ones, you have to change your Control by Mobile Apps network access to permissive. Both of these actions are necessary so that ADBTuner and/or Roku Bridge can control these devices and send the directions we talked about before. Without that, none of this will work. You'll know if you have things set up correctly if you're getting all green lights in the program's interfaces. Note that the streaming endpoint in ADBTuner and encoder URL in the Roku Bridge must also be correct. I've found this to be a bit finicky, so recommend HTTP, the IP address of the encoder, to port 8090 / the LinkPy port name, either default or whatever you named it, like I did to HDMI 1 and HDMI 2. Finally, after doing all the prerequisites and installation steps, there is a post-installation checklist. This basically consists of launching each station to make sure it is working as expected. In ADBTuner, that consists of clicking the preview button on each one. Meanwhile, in Roku Bridge, there is a live TV preview area. If the stations work in these testing tools, then they'll work exactly the same elsewhere, like in Channels DVR. And even though you don't get to see it normally, when you close the station, ADBTuner and Roku Bridge both use directions to exit out of the apps. Here's an example of each one, so you can see what is happening back on the streaming dongles that you normally wouldn't even notice. It's additionally worthwhile pointing out that, while you are testing, you should also make some modifications for your local networks. With stations like NBC, CBS, Fox, and PBS, they have been set up with a single affiliate, namely mine. Therefore, you'll want to change the names in the Gracenote station IDs if you are using Gracenote Guide data, which you should be if you're using Channels DVR. If you need assistance with finding Gracenote IDs, there are directions linked in the wiki, including to another streaming library manager extension in Media Tools Manager, or MTM. There are some optional activities you can undertake too, such as changing the station numbers. They have been grouped together solely based on app and provider information, so they have a technical meaning. Otherwise, PLM again could be used for setting these, as well as many other actions you might want to take, like changing the guide logos or adding station descriptions. Beyond that, there are some stations not included that you may want to add. For instance, NBC has different regional sports nets available, Fox One has some premium channels if you are a subscriber, and PBS subnets vary tremendously market to market. The good news is that all you have to do to create a new station from one of these guys is replicate an existing one and only change the name, the Gracenote Guide ID, and one field to determine how many times you need to go through certain looping processes. Earlier, with ESPN2, we had to go right once, but there are other stations in the ESPN app. Each one reflects the number of times we need the directions to press right and wait a second, from 0 for ESPN to 13 for ESPN Deportes. Therefore, if another one were needed, all we need is that number to add while assigning the same directions through the ADBTuner configurations or Roku Bridge plugins. Should there be an additional app that requires a unique configuration or plugin, then that will have to be created and you can resync it from the HDMI Encoder Native Apps repository. I won't get into how one of these sets of directions can be built right now, but details are available on the wiki. And of course, community contributions are always welcome and encouraged. Other than that, all you really need to do is take the output M3U station list from ADBTuner and Roku Bridge and import them into playback applications like Channels DVR or VLC. Once more, it is recommended to use PLM as the middleman to get all of those previously discussed benefits, but that's entirely optional. No matter the approach, the end result is the goal we have laid out at the beginning. Being able to watch or record anything you want, anywhere you want, anytime you want, any way you want. So go out and deploy HDMI Encoder Native Apps and simply enjoy.